Get out of the car now. Officer Greg Sanders barked, his hand resting dangerously close to the holster on his belt. Tasha Williams, dressed in a sleek pantsuit and clutching her handbag tightly, sat frozen in her car. Her mind raced as she stared at the aggressive officer through her windshield. This wasn't the first time she'd been stopped without reason, but something about Greg's smug smirk and the casual way his partner leaned against their squad car told her this was no routine stop. "Is there a problem, officer?" Tasha asked, her voice steady but firm as she cracked the window slightly. Greg chuckled, a low, condescending sound that echoed in the quiet street. "Step out of the car. Now." Tasha glanced at the dashboard, her phone recording the encounter discreetly. She opened the door and stepped out, her heels clicking against the pavement. Greg's partner, Officer Paul, straightened up, his eyes narrowing. "Turn around, hands on the car," Greg ordered. "What am I being stopped for?" Tasha pressed, her tone calm but unwavering. Greg leaned closer, a malicious grin spreading across his face. "You match the description of someone we're looking for. Now, don't make me repeat myself." Tasha sighed, sensing the futility of protesting. She complied, feeling the cold metal of the car against her palms. The pat-down was unnecessarily rough, Greg taking his time to search every inch of her despite her clear lack of weapons or contraband. Paul watched silently, arms crossed. "She's clean, man," he muttered, but Greg ignored him. Greg's voice was laced with amusement as he stepped back. "Let's have a little fun. Check her bag, maybe she's hiding something." The words made Tasha's stomach churn. This wasn't about safety or protocol, it was a game to them. But Tasha stayed quiet, her mind calculating every move, every word. She watched Greg rifle through her handbag, pulling out her ID, keys, and an envelope with her law firm's logo emblazoned on it. "State lawyer." Greg sneered, holding up her ID. His tone dripped with disbelief. "You're kidding me." For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face, but he quickly masked it with arrogance. "I don't buy it. State lawyer or not, you're acting suspicious." Tasha's heart pounded. This was her moment to turn the tables, but she knew she had to tread carefully. "Why don't you call and confirm?" she suggested, her voice still calm. "I'm sure your supervisor would love to hear about this." Greg's smirk faltered. Before he could respond, a car rolled up to the curb, its driver staring intently at the unfolding scene. Paul shifted uncomfortably, his unease palpable. Greg tossed Tasha's belongings back into her bag, but not before accidentally dropping her ID on the ground. As she bent to pick it up, Greg's radio crackled, cutting through the tension. "Dispatch, we've got a report of..." Greg switched off the radio abruptly, his face tightening. "You're free to go," he snapped. But Tasha didn't move. Her gaze locked with Greg's, her expression unreadable. "I'll be filing a formal complaint," she said evenly, her words a quiet promise. Greg's jaw clenched. "Do whatever you want, lady." As Tasha got back into her car, Greg's partner muttered something under his breath, but she didn't catch it. Her hands trembled slightly as she started the engine. She drove off slowly, her mind replaying every second of the encounter. But she wasn't done yet. The day had started uneventfully. Tasha woke up early, prepared for a long day of meetings, and decided to take a scenic route to clear her mind. She was a rising star in the legal field, known for her sharp mind and calm demeanor. Her colleagues often joked that nothing rattled Tasha Williams. But as she sipped her morning coffee, she had no idea her composure would be tested in ways she couldn't have imagined. Her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant, Amanda. "Call me when you're free. The governor's office wants an update on the Peterson case." Tasha smiled. She'd been working tirelessly on the case for months, and the governor's office taking an interest was a good sign. She typed a quick reply and set the phone down, focusing on the road ahead. The streets were quiet, lined with leafy trees and quaint suburban houses. Tasha hummed along to the soft jazz playing on the radio, enjoying the rare moment of peace. She was only a few miles from her office when the flashing lights appeared in her rearview mirror. At first, she assumed it was an emergency vehicle, but when the cruiser stayed behind her and the siren blared, she realized she was being pulled over. Confused but calm, she pulled to the side of the road. Her fingers tightened around the steering wheel as Greg Sanders approached her car, his demeanor hostile from the start. Paul lingered by the cruiser, his body language less aggressive but no less intimidating. "License and registration," Greg demanded without so much as a greeting. Tasha handed over the documents, her mind racing. She knew her rights, knew she hadn't done anything wrong. But as Greg's questions grew more pointed and his tone more condescending, her suspicion deepened. This wasn't about a traffic violation. When he ordered her out of the car, her stomach dropped. The stop was escalating, and Tasha knew she had to remain composed. She'd seen cases like this before, minority drivers targeted by officers with too much power and too little accountability. But what Greg didn't know was that Tasha Williams wasn't just any black woman. She was a state lawyer with connections, influence, and an unshakable resolve. And she wasn't going to let this slide. Tasha parked her car in the underground lot of her office building, her mind still swirling with the morning's events. She checked her phone, 3 missed calls from Amanda, along with a text. "Amanda, where are you? Meeting rescheduled for 10 a.m. Tasha glanced at the clock. It was already 9:45 a.m. She groaned, grabbed her bag, and made her way to the elevator, determined to push the encounter with the officers out of her mind, for now. By the time she walked into the sleek conference room, the other attendees were already seated. Amanda gave her a questioning look, but Tasha shook her head, signaling that now wasn't the time. She took her place at the head of the table, exuding her usual calm authority. "Good morning, everyone," she began, launching into the latest developments on the Peterson case. The meeting ran smoothly, her team hanging on her every word as she outlined strategies and deadlines. For a while, Tasha was able to compartmentalize, focusing entirely on the work in front of her. But as the meeting wound down, her thoughts drifted back to the stop. The arrogance on Greg Sanders' face, the way he rifled through her things like it was a game, it all felt so personal. "Everything okay?" Amanda's voice broke through her thoughts as the room emptied. "Yeah," Tasha replied, her voice steady. "I'll explain later." Amanda nodded, her brow furrowed with concern, but she didn't press further. Tasha appreciated that about her. She knew when to give space. Back in her office, Tasha pulled out her phone and replayed the video she'd recorded during the stop. Her jaw clenched as Greg's voice echoed from the tiny speaker. She noted every word, every gesture, and every breach of protocol. This wasn't just an abuse of power, it was a blatant display of racism. She opened her laptop and began typing. First, a detailed account of the incident, including the time, location, and the officer's actions. Then, she drafted an email to her contacts in the district attorney's office. She didn't send it yet. Instead, she saved it as a draft and leaned back in her chair, her fingers drumming on the desk. Tasha wasn't impulsive. She knew the value of careful planning, especially in a situation like this. Her goal wasn't just to hold these officers accountable, it was to ensure they couldn't do this to anyone else. But before she could figure out her next move, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from her brother Malcolm. "What's up?" she answered, leaning back in her chair. "You tell me," Malcolm replied. "You sound tense." Tasha hesitated. Malcolm was a public defender, and though they often shared work-related stories, she wasn't sure if she wanted to burden him with this. "It's nothing," she said lightly. "Just a long morning." "Don't give me that. I know you better than that," Malcolm pressed. "What happened?" Tasha sighed, relenting. She recounted the stop, her voice measured but laced with anger. By the time she finished, Malcolm was silent. "Are you serious?" he finally said, his voice low. "They stopped you for fun?" "That's exactly what it felt like," Tasha replied. "But don't worry, I'm handling it." "Handling it how?" Malcolm asked, his tone sharp. "Tasha, you can't just let this slide." "I'm not," she said firmly. "I've got the video, and I'm documenting everything. Trust me, they messed with the wrong person." Malcolm chuckled dryly. "They sure did. Let me know if you need backup." "I will," Tasha promised. "Thanks, Mal." After they hung up, Tasha stared at her computer screen. The draft email seemed to taunt her, daring her to hit send. But she wasn't ready, not yet. First, she needed to gather more information. That evening, Tasha sat in her living room, laptop open on the coffee table. She had spent hours digging into Officer Greg Sanders' record, using every resource at her disposal. What she found didn't surprise her. Complaints of racial profiling, excessive use of force, stops with no probable cause. Greg Sanders wasn't just a bad cop, he was a serial offender. And yet, he was still on the force. Tasha's anger simmered, but she kept her focus. She noted every detail, every piece of evidence she could find. This wasn't just about filing a complaint, it was about building a case. She knew how the system worked, knew how easy it was for complaints to get buried under bureaucracy. If she wanted to make an impact, she had to be thorough. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Amanda. Amanda, don't forget the charity gala tomorrow. Starts at 7 p.m. sharp. Tasha groaned. The last thing she wanted to do was dress up and make small talk with donors. But skipping the gala wasn't an option. Her firm was one of the sponsors, and her attendance was expected. She typed a quick reply, "I'll be there," and set the phone down. Her eyes drifted back to her laptop screen. The file she was compiling on Greg Sanders was growing by the minute, but she knew it wasn't enough. She needed more. And she knew exactly how to get it. The voice on the other end of the line belonged to Detective Rachel Monroe, an old friend and one of the few people Tasha trusted within law enforcement. Rachel had built a reputation for being tough but fair, a rarity in a system often riddled with corruption. Though they hadn't spoken in years, Tasha knew Rachel was her best chance at uncovering more about Greg Sanders. "Tasha, this sounds serious," Rachel said after hearing a brief rundown of the situation. "You're saying this officer stopped and searched you without cause, and then mocked you for being a lawyer?" "Mocked would be an understatement," Tasha replied. "It was like he was trying to humiliate me for sport. I've already started gathering evidence, but I need internal records, complaints, disciplinary actions, anything that'll show a pattern of misconduct." Rachel sighed on the other end of the line. "You know I can't just hand over that kind of information. There are protocols." "I know," Tasha said, her tone softening. "But Rachel, this guy is dangerous. He's gotten away with this too many times, and if someone doesn't stop him, it's only going to get worse. I'm not asking you to break the rules. I'm asking you to help me hold him accountable." There was a long pause before Rachel finally spoke. "I'll see what I can do. But you didn't hear it from me." "Thank you," Tasha said, relief washing over her. "I owe you one." Rachel chuckled. "You owe me about 5. I'll be in touch." As Tasha hung up, she felt a small spark of hope. Rachel's involvement could be the turning point she needed. But there was still a long way to go, and Tasha wasn't about to rest. The next evening, Tasha found herself at the charity gala, dressed in an elegant navy gown and a pair of heels that pinched her feet. The grand ballroom was packed with politicians, business leaders, and other high-profile guests. Amanda, ever the efficient assistant, handed her a flute of champagne as soon as she arrived. "You look stunning," Amanda said, eyeing Tasha's outfit. "But you seem distracted. What's going on?" Tasha forced a smile. "Just thinking about work." Amanda raised an eyebrow but didn't push. "Well, try to relax. This is supposed to be a celebration, remember?" Tasha nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She scanned the room, her lawyer's instincts kicking in as she observed the crowd. The gala was supposed to be a networking event, but all Tasha could think about was the file on Greg Sanders sitting on her laptop at home. She was about to excuse herself when a familiar face appeared in the crowd. Malcolm. Her brother was dressed sharply in a tailored suit, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced with a look of determination. "What are you doing here?" Tasha asked as he approached. "Supporting my big sister," Malcolm replied with a grin. "And keeping an eye on you." "You've got that, I'm plotting something, look again." Tasha rolled her eyes. "I don't need a babysitter." "No, but you need backup," Malcolm said, his tone more serious. "You're not in this alone, Tash." Before she could respond, the room fell silent as the host took the stage. The next hour was filled with speeches, applause, and pledges of donations. Tasha clapped politely, but her mind remained on the task ahead. She needed to stay focused, to keep building her case against Greg. As the evening wound down, Malcolm pulled her aside. "I've been thinking about what you told me," he said. "If you're serious about taking this guy down, you're going to need more than just records and a complaint." Tasha nodded. "I know. I need to get him on the radar of someone who can actually do something about it." Malcolm hesitated, then leaned closer. "There's someone I think you should talk to. A journalist. He's been digging into police misconduct cases for years, and he's good, like, Pulitzer-level good. If anyone can bring attention to this, it's him." Tasha frowned. "A journalist? Mal, you know how risky that is. If this leaks before I'm ready." "It won't," Malcolm assured her. "This guy's solid. No names, no leaks, just facts. Let me set up a meeting." Tasha considered it for a moment before nodding. Okay. But keep it quiet. Malcolm smiled. You got it. And Tasha? Be careful. I always am, she replied, though the weight of his words lingered as she left the gala. Later that night, Tasha sat on her couch, her laptop open in front of her. She was reviewing the footage from the stop again when her phone buzzed with a message from Rachel. Rachel, got something for you. Call me. Tasha's heart skipped a beat. She grabbed her phone and dialed immediately. Rachel answered on the first ring. Okay, Rachel said, her tone brisk. Sanders has been hit with over a dozen complaints in the past 5 years. Excessive force, racial profiling, unlawful stops, you name it. But here's the kicker, none of them stuck. Either the complaints were dropped, or the department swept them under the rug. Tasha's grip on the phone tightened. How is he still on the force? Connections, Rachel replied. The guy's got friends in high places. But there's something else. I found a name that keeps popping up in the reports, someone who's been quietly covering for him. Who? Tasha demanded. Rachel hesitated. His precinct captain. The same guy who signed off on every complaint dismissal. Tasha's mind raced. This wasn't just about Greg Sanders anymore. It was about a system that enabled and protected him. And now, she had a name. Tasha's heart raced as she stared through the peephole. Greg Sanders stood on her doorstep, his stance casual but his expression cold. How did he find her? Why was he here? She instinctively stepped back, her mind calculating her next move. She grabbed her phone from the couch and dialed 911, her hands trembling. Before the operator could answer, Greg knocked again, louder this time. Ms. Williams, he called, his voice muffled through the door. I just want to talk. Tasha ignored him, her voice urgent as she spoke into the phone. There's a man outside my door, Officer Greg Sanders. I need someone here immediately. The operator asked for her address and assured her that officers were on their way. Tasha hung up and stared at the door, her breathing shallow. She quickly set her phone to record and placed it on the table nearby. I know you're in there, Greg said, his tone sharper now. Open the door, or we're going to have a problem. Tasha forced herself to stay calm. Leave my property, or I'll have you arrested for trespassing. Greg chuckled darkly. I'm not on your property, ma'am. I'm on public access. His smugness made her skin crawl. He was trying to intimidate her, to make her feel powerless. But Tasha wasn't about to back down. You're harassing me, she said firmly. And everything you're saying is being recorded. For a moment, there was silence. Then Greg spoke again, his tone mocking. You think that little video of yours is going to scare me? You're not the first, and you won't be the last. The words hit her like a punch. He wasn't just admitting his behavior, he was flaunting it. Tasha clenched her fists, her fear giving way to anger. She took a deep breath, her mind racing. She needed to stall him until the police arrived. What do you want, Sanders? She asked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Greg leaned closer to the door. I just came to warn you. Drop whatever you're planning. You don't want to make enemies in the wrong places. Tasha's jaw tightened. He was trying to scare her into silence, but he'd underestimated her resolve. You're already too late. I've reported you, and I'm not stopping until you're held accountable. Greg didn't respond immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and dangerous. You're making a big mistake, lady. Before she could reply, the sound of sirens filled the air. Greg's expression darkened as the flashing lights of a patrol car illuminated the street. He took a step back, his smirk returning. We'll see about that, he said before turning and walking away. Tasha waited until the officers knocked on her door before she opened it, her phone still recording. She explained everything that had happened, her voice calm but firm. The officers took her statement and assured her they'd file a report. But Tasha wasn't convinced. She could see the hesitation in their eyes, the unspoken camaraderie that often protected men like Greg Sanders. As they left, she knew this was only the beginning. The next morning, Tasha met with Malcolm in a quiet corner of their favorite cafe. She filled him in on what had happened, her words coming out in a rush. He showed up at your house? Malcolm asked, his voice rising in disbelief. That's insane, Tash. He's escalating. I know, Tasha said. But this just proves how desperate he is. He knows he's in trouble. Malcolm shook his head, his expression grim. You need protection. You can't take this guy on by yourself. I'm not, Tasha said. I have you and Rachel, and the journalist you mentioned. Speaking of which, have you set up the meeting? Malcolm hesitated, then nodded. Yeah. His name's Adam Pierce. He's meeting us at his office tomorrow morning. Good, Tasha said, her determination growing. The more people we have on this, the better. The next day, Tasha and Malcolm walked into a small, cluttered office in downtown D.C. Adam Pierce, a wiry man in his early 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, greeted them with a firm handshake. I've heard about Sanders, Adam said after Tasha recounted her story. The guy's a known problem, but no one's been able to pin anything on him. You might just be the one to change that. Tasha raised an eyebrow. Why do you say that? Adam leaned back in his chair, a faint smile on his lips. Because you're not just a victim. You're a lawyer with resources, connections, and a voice. That makes you dangerous. To him and the system that protects him. Tasha nodded. I'm prepared to do whatever it takes. But I need your help to expose him. Adam tapped his fingers on his desk, considering her words. I'll dig into his background, talk to some sources, and see what I can find. But you need to be careful. Once he realizes you're working with me, he'll come after you even harder. I can handle it, Tasha said, her tone resolute. Adam studied her for a moment before nodding. All right. Let's take him down. That night, Tasha returned home, exhausted but hopeful. The pieces were falling into place, and she finally felt like she had the upper hand. But as she prepared for bed, a sinking feeling settled in her stomach. She checked her front door, double-locking it, and made sure all the windows were secure. She couldn't shake the memory of Greg's words, the threat lingering in his tone. As she climbed into bed, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Unknown. Careful, lawyer. You're playing a dangerous game. Tasha's breath caught in her throat. She stared at the message, her heart pounding. Tasha spent the rest of the night tossing and turning, the weight of Greg's threats pressing heavily on her mind. Every creak of her house, every faint sound outside, felt amplified in the silence. But beneath the fear was something more potent. Determination. Greg Sanders had crossed a line, and she wasn't going to back down. The next morning, she called Rachel. I got a text last night, Tasha said without preamble. It wasn't directly from Sanders, but it has his fingerprints all over it. Rachel's sigh was audible. What did it say? It was a warning, Tasha replied. Telling me I'm playing a dangerous game. I replied, I probably shouldn't have, but I couldn't let it slide. Jesus, Tasha, Rachel said. You need to be careful. If he's willing to show up at your house, who knows what he's capable of? That's exactly why I can't stop, Tasha said firmly. If I let him scare me into silence, he'll just keep doing this to others. Rachel was quiet for a moment. All right. I'll run the number that texted you. Maybe we can trace it back to him. Thanks, Tasha said, relief washing over her. And Rachel? Be careful too. If he finds out you're helping me. I can handle myself, Rachel interrupted. Just focus on what you're doing, and I'll take care of the rest. Later that day, Tasha met Malcolm and Adam at the journalist's office. Adam looked up from his computer as she walked in, a grim expression on his face. I found something, he said, gesturing for her to sit. It's bigger than we thought. Tasha's stomach churned. How much bigger? Adam leaned forward, his voice low. Sanders isn't just some rogue cop. He's part of a network, a group of officers who've been covering for each other for years. They share tips on avoiding disciplinary action, help each other falsify reports, and even intimidate witnesses into silence. Tasha's jaw tightened. And no one stopped them? Adam shook his head. Not yet. But with your case, we might finally have enough to blow this wide open. Malcolm crossed his arms, his expression dark. So it's not just Sanders we're up against. It's an entire system. Exactly, Adam said. Which is why we have to be smart. If we move too soon, they'll close ranks and bury everything. Tasha nodded, her mind racing. What do you suggest? We keep gathering evidence, Adam said. I'm already working on a story, but I need more. If you can get me anything, emails, recordings, anything that ties Sanders to this network, it'll strengthen our case. Tasha thought of the video she'd recorded during the stop. I have footage of Sanders harassing me. It's not much, but it's a start. Send it to me, Adam said. And keep your guard up. If he knows you're working with me, he won't just threaten you, he'll act. As Tasha drove home, she couldn't shake the unease that had settled over her. The stakes were higher than she'd realized, and the enemy was more dangerous than she'd anticipated. But if anything, that only strengthened her resolve. When she arrived home, she noticed a car parked across the street. It wasn't one she recognized, and its windows were tinted too dark to see inside. Her pulse quickened, but she forced herself to stay calm. She parked in her driveway and entered her house, locking the door behind her. She peeked through the blinds, watching the car. It didn't move. Tasha grabbed her phone and dialed Malcolm. "There's a car outside my house," she said. "It's been sitting there since I got home." "Describe it," Malcolm said, his voice immediately alert. "Black sedan, tinted windows," Tasha said. "It hasn't moved." "Stay inside," Malcolm said. "I'm coming over." Tasha hung up and sat on the couch, her eyes glued to the car. Minutes felt like hours as she waited for Malcolm to arrive. When his car finally pulled into her driveway, the black sedan started its engine and sped off. Malcolm rushed to her door, his face grim. "Did you get the plate number?" Tasha shook her head. It was too fast. Malcolm swore under his breath. "This isn't good, Tash. They're watching you." "I know," Tasha said quietly. "But I'm not stopping." "You're going to need more protection," Malcolm said. "I'll stay here tonight. And tomorrow, we're getting you a security system." That night, as Malcolm slept on the couch, Tasha sat at her dining table, reviewing the files she'd gathered. Her phone buzzed with an email from Adam. Subject: Potential lead. Body: Tasha. "I found a whistleblower. Former cop, says he knows about the network. He's willing to talk, but only if he's guaranteed anonymity. Let me know if you're interested. Adam." Tasha replied immediately. "Let's set up a meeting." As she hit send, her phone buzzed again, this time, a text. "Unknown. Last warning. Drop it, or you'll regret it." Tasha stared at the message, her fear mingling with anger. She saved the text, her resolve hardening. The whistleblower meeting was scheduled for a quiet diner on the outskirts of town. Tasha arrived early, scanning the sparsely populated booths for anything suspicious. Malcolm had insisted on coming with her, sitting in his car in the parking lot, watching for any sign of trouble. She didn't argue. Extra eyes and ears couldn't hurt. Adam arrived minutes later, nodding briefly before sitting across from her. "He's nervous," he said quietly. "Cops don't usually turn on each other, especially not on a network like this." Tasha nodded. "Did you vet him?" Adam gave her a pointed look. "Thoroughly. He's legit, but scared. Let's not spook him." The former officer walked in shortly after. He was tall and wiry, his face lined with years of stress and regret. He slid into the booth, his eyes darting nervously around the room. "Thanks for coming," Tasha said, her tone calm and reassuring. "Don't thank me yet," he muttered, barely meeting her eyes. "I shouldn't even be here." "We appreciate your courage," Adam said. "You're doing the right thing." The man let out a bitter laugh. "The right thing? I kept my mouth shut for years. I let it happen. The only reason I'm here now is because they turned on me." "What happened?" Tasha asked, leaning forward slightly. The man hesitated, then spoke in a low voice. "Sanders and his crew, they're untouchable. They've got dirt on everyone. Cops, judges, politicians. If you don't play by their rules, they'll ruin you. I didn't want to go along with it anymore, so they framed me. Said I planted evidence on a suspect. My career's over. Do you have proof?" Adam asked. The man nodded. "I kept records. Emails, texts, even some recordings. I didn't know what to do with them until now." Tasha's pulse quickened. "Can you share them with us?" He hesitated. "I'll give you what I have, but I want protection. If they find out I talked to you." "You'll stay anonymous," Adam assured him. "No names, no details that could trace back to you." The man looked at Tasha. "And you? Can you guarantee they won't come after me?" Tasha met his gaze, her voice steady. "I can't make promises, but I'll do everything in my power to make sure you're safe. What you're doing could bring justice to a lot of people." The man sighed, pulling a flash drive from his pocket. "This is everything I've got. If you use it, make sure it counts." Tasha took the drive, her hand steady despite the weight of what it represented. "Thank you." The man nodded once, then stood and walked out of the diner without another word. Tasha and Adam sat in silence for a moment, the gravity of the situation sinking in. Adam finally broke the silence. "This could blow the whole thing wide open. Or make us bigger targets," Tasha replied quietly. Adam nodded grimly. "We'll tread carefully. Let me comb through this and see what we're working with." That evening, Tasha sat in her living room, staring at the flash drive on the coffee table. She knew the information it contained could be the key to taking down Sanders and his network. But she also knew it would put her in even greater danger. Her phone buzzed with a call from Rachel. "I ran that number from the text you got," Rachel said without preamble. "It's unregistered, but the signal pings to a location near Sanders' precinct." Tasha frowned. "So, it's probably him. Or someone working with him," Rachel replied. "Either way, you need to be careful. These guys don't play by the rules." "I know," Tasha said. "But I've got something that might level the playing field." A whistleblower came forward. "He gave me evidence." Rachel's voice softened. "Tasha, that's huge. But it also makes you a target." "I'm already a target," Tasha said. "At least now I have something to fight back with." The next day, Tasha, Malcolm, and Adam gathered in Adam's office. Adam had spent the night reviewing the files from the flash drive, and his expression was a mix of excitement and unease. "This is explosive," Adam said, spreading printouts across his desk. "There's evidence of illegal stops, fabricated charges, and even payouts to keep people quiet. And it's all connected to Sanders and his captain." "Does it tie them to the broader network?" Tasha asked. "Not directly," Adam admitted. "But it's a start. With this, we can at least bring enough attention to force an internal investigation." Malcolm frowned. "An internal investigation isn't enough. These guys need to be exposed publicly." Tasha nodded. "Agreed. But we need to be smart about how we release this. If we move too soon, they'll bury it." Adam leaned back in his chair. "Then we go public with just enough to start the fire. Once the flames are too big to put out, we drop the rest." Tasha considered this, her mind racing. "Let's do it." That night, as Tasha prepared to send a preliminary batch of evidence to Adam for his article, her phone buzzed again. "Unknown. You think you're smart? We're watching." Her stomach twisted, but she didn't let fear take over. Instead, she typed a quick reply. "Tasha, good. Watch closely. You're about to see justice served." The morning after sending the email, Tasha woke up to a flood of notifications on her phone. News outlets had picked up Adam's article, which included damning details about Greg Sanders and his captain. The headline was a gut punch. "Exposed, Corruption and Racism in the Police Force, the Sanders Network." Tasha scrolled through the article, her heart racing as she read. Adam had been careful, naming Sanders and the captain directly, but withholding the whistleblower's identity. The piece included excerpts from emails and texts, showing clear patterns of abuse and cover-ups. Her phone buzzed with a call from Malcolm. "You've seen it?" he asked, his voice taut. "Yeah," Tasha said, still staring at the screen. "It's out." "They're not going to take this lying down," Malcolm warned. "You need to be extra careful." "I know," Tasha replied. "But this is what we wanted, to force them into the spotlight." As if on cue, her phone vibrated again, this time with a message from Adam. "Adam, it's gaining traction fast. TV networks want interviews. Let's discuss next steps." Tasha felt a mix of pride and apprehension. The article had ignited a firestorm, but the attention also meant the stakes were higher than ever. By midday, the fallout was already in motion. The police department released a brief statement claiming they would launch an internal investigation. Protesters gathered outside the precinct, holding signs that read "Justice for All" and "End Police Corruption." Social media exploded with support for the victims mentioned in the article. But Tasha knew better than to celebrate too soon. The people exposed in the article wouldn't sit idly by, they would retaliate. Sure enough, by late afternoon, Rachel called, her voice urgent. "Tasha, I just heard something, and it's bad. Sanders knows you're behind this." Tasha's grip tightened on her phone. "What do you mean?" "He's been ranting at the precinct, saying you're out to ruin him," Rachel said. "And it gets worse. Someone's leaking false rumors about you. They're trying to discredit you." Tasha's stomach churned. What kind of rumors? That you're fabricating evidence, using this case for personal gain, stuff like that, Rachel replied. It's all nonsense, but they're trying to muddy the waters. Tasha took a deep breath, steadying herself. Let them try. The evidence speaks for itself. Tasha, you need to be ready for anything, Rachel said. These people don't play fair. I know, Tasha said. Thanks for the warning. That evening, Tasha sat in her living room with Malcolm, reviewing the day's developments. The news coverage had been extensive, with multiple outlets dissecting the corruption outlined in Adam's article. But as they watched, Malcolm's phone buzzed with a text. It's from Adam, Malcolm said, his brow furrowing as he read. He says he's been followed all day. Tasha's pulse quickened. Do you think it's them? Who else? Malcolm replied. We need to get him some protection. I'll call him, Tasha said, grabbing her phone. He needs to stay somewhere safe until this blows over. As she dialed, headlights lit up the front of her house. Tasha froze, her phone still pressed to her ear. A black SUV idled outside, its windows tinted too dark to see inside. Malcolm, she said quietly, nodding toward the window. He stood and peered through the blinds, his jaw tightening. Same car as before? Tasha nodded. I think so. Her call to Adam went to voicemail, and she quickly hung up. We need to report this. They won't do anything, Malcolm said, his voice low. It's their people. The SUV stayed parked for several minutes, its engine rumbling. Tasha and Malcolm stayed still, watching. Finally, the car drove off, but the unease lingered. This isn't going to stop, Tasha said, her voice firm. Not until they're held accountable. The next day, Tasha and Malcolm met with Adam in a secure location, a small unassuming office building on the outskirts of the city. Adam looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes. They've been trying to scare me off, Adam said, his voice flat. Following me, making calls to my family. But it's not going to work. Good, Tasha said. Because we're just getting started. Adam leaned forward, lowering his voice. The whistleblower gave me more. Names of other officers involved. Connections to local politicians. It's enough to bring down the whole network. Tasha's eyes widened. That's huge. But if we go public with it now, they'll come after us harder. We need to build a case they can't ignore, Malcolm said. Something so airtight that even their connections can't save them. Adam nodded. Agreed. But we need to move fast. The longer we wait, the more time they have to cover their tracks. Tasha thought for a moment. Let's gather everything we have and take it to the Attorney General. If we can get them to open an official investigation, it'll be harder for Sanders and his crew to dodge it. Do you trust the AG's office? Malcolm asked. Not entirely, Tasha admitted. But it's our best shot. That night, as Tasha reviewed the new evidence, her phone buzzed again. Another text, this time with a photo attached. It showed her walking into Adam's office earlier that day. Unknown, we're watching. You're out of time. Tasha's heart pounded as she stared at the message. They were escalating. But instead of fear, she felt a surge of defiance. She saved the photo and the message, then sent it to Rachel. Tasha, they're still coming. But so am I. The next morning, Tasha sat in her office, the blinds drawn and her door locked. Her laptop was open, displaying the meticulously organized files she'd compiled on Greg Sanders and his network. Every email, every text, every piece of evidence from the whistleblower was laid out in painstaking detail. She was preparing her submission to the Attorney General's office. A knock at her door startled her. She glanced at her phone, double-checking that Malcolm, Rachel, and Adam were the only people who knew her whereabouts. Who is it? She called, her voice steady. It's Amanda, came the familiar voice of her assistant. You've got a visitor. Tasha frowned. Who? Amanda hesitated. He says his name is Detective Monroe. Tasha's stomach tightened. Rachel hadn't mentioned sending anyone. Let him in, she said cautiously. The door opened, and a man in his mid-40s stepped in. He wore a neatly pressed suit, his badge clipped to his belt. He looked around the office before his sharp gaze settled on Tasha. Ms. Williams, he said, extending a hand. Detective Sean Monroe, Internal Affairs. I'm here about Greg Sanders. Tasha shook his hand, her eyes narrowing. What about him? Monroe glanced at the files on her desk. I heard about the article. It stirred up quite the storm. I believe we're on the same side here. Tasha's skepticism didn't waver. And what side is that? Monroe smiled faintly. The side that wants to clean up the force. Sanders isn't just a problem for you, he's a stain on all of us. Internal Affairs has been trying to take him down for years, but we never had enough to make it stick. Now you do, Tasha said, her tone firm. The evidence we've gathered is enough to bring him and his network down. That's what I'm here to discuss, Monroe said, sitting across from her. I want to help. Tasha studied him carefully. His words were convincing, but she'd learned to be wary of sudden allies. Help how? I can take your evidence directly to the top, Monroe said. Circumvent the red tape, get things moving faster. But I need full access to everything you've got. Tasha leaned back, her arms crossed. And how do I know I can trust you? Monroe's smile faded. You don't. But you're running out of options. Sanders is already mobilizing his allies. If you don't act fast, this whole thing could collapse. Tasha considered his words. She didn't trust him, but he wasn't entirely wrong. If Sanders was building a counterattack, time wasn't on her side. I'll think about it, she said finally. Monroe nodded, standing. Fair enough. But don't wait too long. Every minute counts. As he left, Tasha's phone buzzed with a call from Rachel. You have company? Rachel asked without greeting. Tasha stiffened. How do you know? I heard through the grapevine that Internal Affairs sent someone to see you. Be careful, Tasha. Not everyone in IA is clean. Tasha's suspicions deepened. What do you know about Detective Sean Monroe? Rachel hesitated. He's got a decent reputation, but I'd still be cautious. If he's legit, he'll understand why you're hesitant. Thanks for the heads up, Tasha said. That evening, Tasha, Malcolm, and Adam met at her house to discuss their next steps. Tasha recounted Monroe's visit, her unease clear. I don't like it, Malcolm said immediately. Why now? Why show up out of nowhere when we're already making progress? I agree, Adam added. We don't need him. We're building a case that can stand on its own. But we're running out of time, Tasha countered. Sanders is escalating, and the longer this drags on, the more dangerous it gets. Malcolm frowned. Do you really trust this guy? No, Tasha admitted. But if he can help us cut through the red tape. Or bury the case, Adam interjected. We can't risk that. They debated late into the night, weighing the pros and cons of involving Monroe. Finally, Tasha made a decision. We'll give him limited access, she said. Enough to prove we're serious, but not enough to compromise the case. If he's legit, he'll work with us. If not, we'll know. The next day, Tasha met Monroe at a neutral location, a busy cafe downtown. She handed him a folder containing select pieces of evidence, carefully curated to avoid revealing her sources. This is what you're getting, she said. If you're serious about helping, you'll know what to do with it. Monroe studied the folder, his expression unreadable. You're cautious. I like that. Good, Tasha said. Because I don't trust you. Monroe smiled faintly. Fair enough. I'll be in touch. As he left, Tasha couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just made a dangerous gamble. That evening, as Tasha reviewed her files, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. Ms. Williams, a deep voice said. This is Captain Howard. I understand you've been causing quite the stir. Tasha's blood ran cold. Captain Howard was Sanders' superior, the man implicated in Adam's article. I'm not sure what you're talking about, Tasha said, keeping her voice even. Oh, I think you do, Howard replied. And I think you'll find that playing with fire tends to get people burned. The line went dead. Tasha stared out the window, her pulse pounding as the black SUV disappeared into the night. She clenched her fists, the fear slowly giving way to anger. Captain Howard's call confirmed what she already suspected. This was bigger than just Greg Sanders. The entire network was mobilizing against her, and they weren't hiding it anymore. She quickly dialed Rachel. Howard called me, Tasha said as soon as Rachel picked up. What did he say? Rachel asked, her tone sharp. Threats, veiled in the usual nonsense about playing with fire, Tasha replied. And the SUV is back. It's clear they're trying to rattle me. Rachel cursed under her breath. Tasha, this is serious. They're escalating, and they won't stop until they feel like you're no longer a threat. Good, Tasha said, surprising even herself with the steel in her voice. That means we're getting to them. Tasha, listen to me, Rachel said. I know you're strong, but you need to be smart. I'm going to reach out to someone in the AG's office I trust. If they open an official investigation, it'll give you more protection. Do it, Tasha agreed. The faster we move, the better. The next morning, Tasha received a call from Adam. His voice was tense. The article's fallout is gaining traction, but it's also stirring up trouble. I just got word from one of my sources that Sanders is planning something big. What kind of something big? Tasha asked, her stomach tightening. Retaliation, Adam said grimly. They want to make an example out of you. Tasha exhaled slowly, letting the weight of his words settle. I'm not backing down. I didn't think you would, Adam said. But you need to be prepared. Do you have security? Malcolm and I are setting up a system today, Tasha said. And I've got Rachel working on getting the AG involved. Good, Adam said. I'll keep digging on my end. But Tasha, be careful. These people don't play fair. I know, she said. But neither do I. By that afternoon, Tasha's house was equipped with a state-of-the-art security system. Cameras covered every angle, motion sensors lined the perimeter, and Malcolm had even installed a reinforced lock on the front door. This should hold them off, Malcolm said, testing the lock. But you need to be on high alert. No walking around alone, no answering the door unless you're expecting someone. Tasha nodded. I know the drill. Thanks for doing this. Always, Malcolm said, his voice firm. You're not in this alone. Later that evening, Tasha was reviewing the files from the whistleblower when her phone buzzed with a message from Rachel. Rachel, meeting set with AG contact. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Stay safe. Tasha replied with a quick thank you, relief washing over her. If the AG's office got involved, it would be a major step forward. She was about to close her laptop when an alert popped up on her phone. The security system had detected motion outside. Tasha froze, her eyes darting to the live feed from the cameras. A figure was moving along the side of the house, their face obscured by a hood. Tasha's heart raced as she grabbed her phone and called Malcolm, who was staying in the guest room. There's someone outside, she whispered urgently. Malcolm appeared within seconds, his phone in hand. He looked at the screen and frowned. Stay here. I'll check it out. Malcolm, don't. But he was already out the door, his steps cautious and deliberate. Tasha watched the cameras anxiously as Malcolm moved toward the figure. The intruder froze, then turned and bolted, disappearing into the shadows. Malcolm returned a moment later, his expression grim. They're gone. Who was it? Tasha asked, her voice shaking. Couldn't see their face, Malcolm said. But they were definitely scoping the place out. Tasha exhaled shakily. This isn't just intimidation anymore. They're escalating. Which means we're close to something big, Malcolm said. But you need to stay on high alert. Tasha nodded, her resolve hardening. I'm not going to let them scare me. The next morning, Tasha and Rachel met with Rachel's contact at the Attorney General's office. The contact, a sharp-eyed woman named Linda Carver, listened intently as they laid out their case. This is damning, Linda said, flipping through the documents. If what you're saying is true, this could expose one of the biggest corruption scandals in the state. It is true, Tasha said firmly. We just need your office to back us up. Linda nodded. I'll take this to the AG personally. But you need to be prepared, this won't happen overnight. Cases like this take time. We understand, Rachel said. But we need protection for Tasha and anyone else involved. Sanders and his people won't take this lying down. I'll make some calls, Linda said. In the meantime, keep gathering evidence. The more we have, the stronger our case. That evening, Tasha returned home feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. Progress was being made, but the threats were escalating. As she double-checked the locks and activated the security system, her phone buzzed with another message. Unknown. You can't hide forever. Tasha stared at the message, her fear quickly replaced by anger. She typed a reply, her fingers steady. Tasha, I'm not hiding. I'm fighting. The next morning, Tasha woke to a flurry of emails and texts. The article's impact had reached new heights, with more people coming forward to share their experiences with Greg Sanders and the corrupt network within the precinct. Adam had sent her a message early in the morning. Adam, more whistleblowers contacting me. It's snowballing. We're not alone in this fight. Tasha read the message and smiled faintly. It was a small but powerful reminder that their efforts were resonating. But as she prepared for the day, a new notification caught her attention, a security alert from her home system. Her stomach dropped as she opened the app. The footage showed two figures outside her house in the early hours of the morning. One of them appeared to spray paint something on her garage door, while the other kept watch. Both wore masks. Tasha rushed outside and froze when she saw the bold red letters scrawled across her garage. "Drop it or else." Her hands trembled, but not with fear. This was rage. She snapped a photo and sent it to Rachel and Malcolm. "Tasha, they hit my house last night. We need to escalate." Malcolm responded immediately. "I'm on my way. Don't do anything alone." Rachel's reply came moments later. "I'll loop in Linda. They're desperate. Be ready for anything." By midday, Malcolm and Rachel were at Tasha's house, examining the vandalism. Rachel's expression was a mix of concern and anger. "They're getting bolder," she said. "This isn't just intimidation, it's a warning." Malcolm crossed his arms, his jaw tight. "We need to hit back harder. If they think they can scare Tasha into backing down, they're dead wrong." Tasha nodded, her gaze steely. "We're not stopping. The AG's office is on board now. It's only a matter of time before they have no place to hide." Rachel held up her phone, recording the vandalism. "I'll make sure Linda sees this. It's more proof of their tactics." As Rachel documented the scene, Malcolm leaned closer to Tasha. "You should stay somewhere else for a while. They know where you live." "I'm not running," Tasha said firmly. "If I leave, they win. I've got the security system, and I'll be careful." "Tasha," Malcolm began, but she cut him off. "No," she said. "This is my home, and I'm not letting them drive me out." Malcolm sighed but didn't argue further. He knew better than to try to sway her when she was this determined. That evening, Adam called with an update. "I've been contacted by another officer," he said. "He's willing to talk, but only anonymously. Do you think he's credible?" Tasha asked. "I do," Adam replied. "He's corroborated everything we already know and added new details about Howard's involvement. It's damning." "What's the next step?" Tasha asked. "I'm working on a follow-up piece," Adam said. "This one will focus on Howard and the systemic corruption. If we can expose the higher-ups, the whole network will start to crumble." Tasha hesitated. "Are you sure about this? Once you name Howard, it'll escalate even further." "I'm sure," Adam said. "They're already coming after us. We might as well go all in." Tasha nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then let's do it." That night, Tasha stayed up late, reviewing the files again. The vandalism on her garage lingered in her mind, a constant reminder of the danger she was in. But she also felt a renewed sense of purpose. Every threat, every act of intimidation only proved how desperate Sanders and his allies were to silence her. Around midnight, another alert from her security system jolted her. She opened the app, her breath catching as she saw movement near her back door. A figure dressed in black was trying to disable the camera. Tasha grabbed her phone and called Malcolm, who was staying at a nearby hotel. "Someone's at my back door," she said, her voice low but urgent. "Stay inside," Malcolm said immediately. "I'm on my way. Call the police." Tasha hung up and dialed 911, her heart pounding. She gave the dispatcher her address and explained the situation, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. Through the security app, she saw the figure give up on the camera and move toward the side of the house. Seconds later, there was a loud knock at her front door. "Tasha Williams," a voice called. "Come outside." Tasha didn't recognize the voice, but she stayed put, her phone still in her hand. The police were on their way, and she wasn't about to confront anyone alone. The figure at the door knocked again, harder this time. "We know you're in there." Tasha's hands shook, but she refused to give in to fear. She watched the live feed as the figure finally retreated, disappearing into the night just as she heard the distant wail of sirens. The next morning, Tasha met with Rachel and Malcolm at a local coffee shop. The events of the previous night had left them all on edge, but Tasha's determination hadn't wavered. "They're getting desperate," Rachel said, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. "But this also means we're close to breaking them." "Close isn't good enough," Malcolm replied, his tone sharp. "They came to her house, Rachel. They're escalating, and it's only a matter of time before they try something worse. I know, Rachel said. That's why we need to push harder. The AG's office is moving on this, but we have to keep the pressure on. Tasha nodded. Adam's next article will name Howard and connect him to the network. If we can tie it all together, the whole system could unravel. But we need to be ready for the fallout, Malcolm said. Once Howard's name is out, they'll go all out to protect themselves. They can try, Tasha said firmly. But we're not backing down. That afternoon, Adam called Tasha with an update. The article is done, he said. It's scheduled to go live tomorrow morning. Once it's out, there's no turning back. Good, Tasha said. Have you taken precautions? Yeah, Adam replied. I've alerted my editor and made copies of all the evidence. If anything happens to me, it'll still get published. Tasha felt a pang of unease but pushed it aside. We'll be ready. That evening, Tasha reviewed her security system, double-checking every lock and camera. Malcolm had decided to stay with her, unwilling to leave her alone after the previous night's events. They sat in the living room, the tension in the air palpable. What's the plan if they come back? Malcolm asked. We don't confront them, Tasha said. We let the security system record everything and call the police. The more evidence we have, the better. Malcolm nodded. And if they don't leave? Tasha hesitated. We'll cross that bridge if we have to. The sound of her phone vibrating broke the silence. It was Rachel. We've got a problem, Rachel said, her voice urgent. Howard knows the article is coming. He's calling in favors to try to suppress it. Tasha's chest tightened. Can he stop it? I don't think so, Rachel said. Adam's editor is standing firm, but Howard's pulling out all the stops. You need to be ready for a counterattack. Thanks for the warning, Tasha said. Keep me updated. After she hung up, Malcolm frowned. What now? We wait, Tasha said. And we stay vigilant. The next morning, Tasha woke to the sound of her phone buzzing repeatedly. She grabbed it and saw a flood of notifications. Adam's article had gone live, and it was already making waves. The headline read, Captain Howard and the Sanders Network, Corruption at the Highest Levels. Tasha skimmed the article, her heart racing as she read the details. Adam had connected the dots, exposing Howard's role in covering up complaints, silencing whistleblowers, and protecting Sanders and his allies. The evidence was overwhelming. Social media erupted with outrage, and news outlets quickly picked up the story. Protesters gathered outside the precinct, demanding justice. The pressure was mounting. But Tasha knew the fight was far from over. By midday, Tasha received a call from Linda Carver at the AG's office. We've reviewed the new evidence, Linda said. It's enough to open a formal investigation into Howard and Sanders. This is a major step forward. That's great news, Tasha said, relief washing over her. But you need to be careful, Linda added. Howard's not going to go down without a fight. I know, Tasha said. But I'm ready. That evening, as Tasha and Malcolm prepared for dinner, her phone buzzed with another security alert. She opened the app and froze. A group of masked individuals was gathered outside her house. One of them carried a can of gasoline, while another held what looked like a lighter. Tasha, Malcolm said urgently, looking over her shoulder. We need to call the police. Now. Tasha nodded, her hands trembling as she dialed 911. She explained the situation quickly, her voice calm despite the fear coursing through her. The dispatcher assured her that officers were on their way, but Tasha knew it might not be fast enough. She and Malcolm watched the live feed as the intruders moved closer to the house. They're trying to intimidate us, Malcolm said. Stay calm. Tasha grabbed a fire extinguisher from the kitchen, her mind racing. She wasn't about to let them destroy her home. Suddenly, the sound of sirens filled the air. The intruders scattered, disappearing into the night as the flashing lights of police cars approached. Tasha and Malcolm stepped outside to meet the officers, their hearts still pounding. One of the officers assured them that they would patrol the area, but Tasha knew this was only a temporary reprieve. The morning after the attempted arson, Tasha sat at her kitchen table with Malcolm, her laptop open in front of her. The events of the previous night had left her rattled, but she was determined to keep moving forward. The evidence was out, the public was outraged, and the AG's office was now fully engaged. Her phone buzzed with a call from Rachel. Tasha, we've got them, Rachel said, her voice triumphant. What do you mean? Tasha asked, sitting up straighter. The AG's office moved fast after last night's stunt. They've issued warrants for Howard Sanders and several others in their network. The evidence from the whistleblower sealed the deal. Tasha exhaled, a wave of relief washing over her. That's incredible. What happens next? They're making arrests today, Rachel said. And with the pressure from the public, it's only a matter of time before more people in their network flip. Tasha thanked Rachel and hung up, turning to Malcolm. It's happening. They're going down. Malcolm grinned. About time. You've done it, Tash. Later that day, the news broke. Captain Howard, Greg Sanders, and 3 other officers from their precinct had been arrested on charges ranging from corruption to conspiracy and obstruction of justice. The footage of their arrests was broadcast on every major news network, sparking a wave of public celebration. Tasha watched the coverage with a sense of vindication. The image of Greg Sanders being led out of the precinct in handcuffs was a moment she wouldn't forget. But the fight wasn't over yet. Over the following weeks, the investigation expanded. More officers were implicated, and the network's reach was revealed to be even deeper than anyone had anticipated. Tasha worked closely with the AG's office, providing testimony and evidence that helped build the case. Meanwhile, Adams' articles continued to expose the systemic corruption, shining a light on the victims who had been silenced for years. The protests grew larger, demanding sweeping reforms in policing and accountability. Tasha became a prominent voice in the movement, using her platform to advocate for change. She was no longer just a state lawyer, she was a symbol of resilience and justice. Months later, Tasha stood on the steps of the courthouse, surrounded by reporters. The trials of Howard Sanders and their co-conspirators had concluded, resulting in convictions across the board. It was a victory not just for Tasha, but for everyone who had suffered under their abuse. "How does it feel to have won?" a reporter asked, holding a microphone toward her. Tasha smiled, her voice steady and confident. "This isn't just my victory. It's a victory for every person who's been silenced, intimidated, or mistreated. Justice isn't about one case, it's about changing the system so this doesn't happen again." The crowd erupted into applause as Tasha stepped away from the podium. Malcolm and Rachel were waiting for her, their faces beaming with pride. "You did it," Rachel said, hugging her. "We did it," Tasha corrected. "I couldn't have done this without all of you." That evening, Tasha sat in her living room, reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. The threats, the fear, and the relentless pressure had tested her in ways she hadn't thought possible. But she had emerged stronger, her resolve unbroken. As she sipped her tea, her phone buzzed with a message from Adam. "Adam, you've changed the game, Tasha. Proud to have been part of this." Tasha smiled, typing a quick reply. "Tasha, we're just getting started." The story ends with Tasha looking out her window at the quiet street outside. The shadows no longer felt threatening. Instead, they reminded her of how far she'd come and the light she'd brought to the darkness. Justice had been served, and Tasha Williams was ready for whatever came next.